I have a weird history with Dragon Ball Z. If you ask me if I was a fan, I'd of course say, yeah, I am. But if you ask me what my favorite episode of the show was, well, I wouldn't have an answer for you. I've never watched the show for more than a few minutes here and there as a kid, but yet I still consider myself a franchise admirer. That's because back in 2006, I was gifted Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 2 for Christmas. I remember opening the game and not really knowing anything about it. A disappointing gift from a kid's perspective. Or so I thought. My grandmother assured me that the guy at GameStop said most teenage boys would be a fan of this game, especially if they already liked Pokemon. I'm not sure what the correlation was there, but thank you, random GameStop employee, because you were right. I did love that game. It took me a while to start it up, given my initial disinterest, but one rainy, boring afternoon I gave it a shot, and I was hooked. I still have my copy of that game, as well as the strategy guide for how to unlock all the characters. It was cool to reflect on that and the memories of playing Tenkaichi 2 as a kid, and again in college, in anticipation of the release of Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. After all my knowledge of this series came from that one single game. After a series of diminishing returns on Dragon Ball Z games, Sparking Zero looks to get back to Budokai Tenkaichi's arena fighter roots by delivering fans an exciting new entry on an old classic. I've now spent about 35 hours with the title, and I can confidently say that this is one of my favorite releases of the year, while also acknowledging that it has some serious flaws that certainly seemed avoidable, at least from my perspective. If you're a fan of the Dragon Ball license, then the amount of care and effort that's been put into this title's presentation will be worth the price of admission alone. All your favorites are here, of course, along with a large roster of other notable side characters from the series, and each of them are exactly how you remember. The hot-headed Vegeta, the tiny punk Babidi, the hesitant Gohan, the goofy but lovable Ginyu Force, the ever-threatening chaos of Kid Buu, and of course, the headstrong Goku, forever chasing further strength and a great fight. Along with them, you'll find new characters from the Dragon Ball Super series like Goku Black, Jiren, Zamasu, and Beerus, but my knowledge of them is far more limited. Regardless, the amount of care that has gone into presenting these characters faithfully is astounding. Meanwhile, combat does have its problems, the major one being how the game handles tutorials, but it's mostly a challenging and fun return to the series' arena fighter DNA. And on top of that, you have a great selection of game modes, rewards, and customization options that ties the whole package together, which left me really impressed. If you're looking for a simple should I buy this game or not answer, I'd say yes with 3 caveats. Number 1, you gotta love Dragon Ball, duh. 2, you must accept this won't be a competitive fighting game in the same spirit as Street Fighter or Smash Bros. And 3, you have to be willing to put in the time to get the most out of this game because it is really challenging. So those are my overall thoughts, and with that, let's get into the full review of Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. It's undeniable that Dragon Ball has some of the most creative, iconic, and awesome character designs we've ever seen in manga and anime. Every character exudes this sense of style that ties them all together, making any of them almost instantly recognizable as belonging to this franchise. Elements like the big Super Saiyan hair, or the over-exaggerated shoulder pads, or even the bulging, never-ending muscles all scream Dragon Ball. Yet each character remains distinct from one another, rarely repeating concepts or ideas when creating new characters. Goku and Vegeta are defined best by their polar opposite personalities, one being a prideful and forever vengeful warrior, while the other is a skilled and happy-go-lucky fighter who's always pushing himself to get better through relying on those around him. Their designs encapsulate their personalities perfectly. Goku always smiling, excited for his next challenge, while his hair goes in all directions, unbothered by anything really. Meanwhile, Vegeta's moments of happiness are usually represented with a smirk, not a smile, arms folded to close himself off to the world, with hair styled straight up, with intensity and purpose, a reflection of his prideful nature, and those damn eyebrows always portraying his anger-filled rage. These are the poster characters of the Dragon Ball license, and so much of their personality is conveyed through their design. It's performance and design that makes it special. And this same level of detail applies to other characters as well, especially the villains and many of their iterations, like Frieza, Cell, Majin Buu, and Goku Black. As always, each new threat is apparently more powerful than the last, as is the series' nature, but rarely does it feel like the latest big bad is retreading old designs or ideas. I mean, think about the confidence that the late great Akira Toriyama must have had when designing Majin Buu and his base form. A big pink blob with the temper of a toddler after fights against the jacked physiques of Cell and Frieza. His vision was unparalleled when it came to design. And the team at Spike Chunsoft did their best to honor Toriyama-san's works while designing the look of Sparking Zero, because the presentation here is remarkable, so much so that I'm starting my review by talking about it when usually this section is reserved for the final moments of a video. The team has done a phenomenal job of translating manga pages to video game form, and although it's been done before, the advances in technology allow these characters to be brought to life once more. It begins with the character models that feel lovingly made and true to the show, full of rich color and detail. I imagine working on so many Goku and Vegeta models could have been exhausting, but each one feels just as true to the show as the last. And the same level of care is extended to every character, regardless of how major or minor they may be. But it doesn't stop there. It's not just the fantastic character models, but also the life that's pumped into them by the extra details, like the famous poses that characters strike, or how robots can't charge their chi meter, or the reprised and inspired voice acting, or the aura emanating from characters as they dragon rush into combat, or even the legendary moves like Masenko, Instant Transmission, Kamehameha, Chocolate Beam, Final Flash, Kaioken, and more. It's dazzling and leaves any fan of the series with a smile on their face, content that they managed to adapt the source material so effortlessly and perfectly. And the arenas you fight in are also up to par, containing many of the series' most iconic locations like the Wastelands, Planet Namek, including its destroyed variant at the hands of Frieza, the Cell Games Arena, and the ruined Future City. They're all here, and these are just a few amongst a healthy roster of maps. But you know what really impressed me most about them was how destructible they are. While this doesn't change up strategy much, it does lend itself to the power of fantasy. These characters are powerful enough to smash through cliff sides, tear through steel buildings, and even fight underwater without limitation. The destructible environments lend an air of weight and power to the fights, which helps sell the Dragon Ball fantasy. At the same time, they do serve a minor mechanical purpose, as taking cover behind objects is a viable way of blocking against certain attacks, particularly those powerful beams like Kamehameha and Special Beam Cannon. They take the hit for you before exploding into dust and debris, allowing you to get off an important charge. And I also have to give a shout out to fights taking place in the World Tournament Arena, as any move that would cause massive damage actually triggers a clip of everyone in the audience evacuating. That's one of many small touches that I really love. And of course, certain matchups between characters with related backgrounds will unlock some unique dialogue, which is just another way the game pays homage to the series' history. They did a fantastic job of presenting these characters and locations in all their glory, and that same praise also extends to the game's main menus, at least on a visual level. There's 7 different screens, and it feels like they packed in as many references and details as possible, ranging from hanging out with Mr. Satan to visiting the Great Zeno, and of course summoning Shenron if you manage to collect all the Dragon Balls. And you can just feel the developer's passion radiating from the screens in these moments. With that being said, it isn't all sunshine and rainbows, especially with these menus. While they are a treat visually, they are very cumbersome to navigate, especially in the shop and customization sections. For some reason, you can't seamlessly switch between these two menus and will be forced to exit the shop and go back to the page menu before re-entering the Kami House to equip any item you just bought. Also, when collecting your rewards, there's a notification for every single one. So if you're like me and you don't realize they exist, you'll get bombarded with a wave of notifications after collecting them all. It's not a big deal or anything, but it was a little bit annoying. This menu presented to me like a series of other actual combat challenges to take on, but no, they are just checklists of tasks to complete. The wording could have been a bit better here to communicate clearly what to expect when entering this challenge menu. Without that extra context, I thought it was more fights, and when it wasn't, I was just bombarded with all these notifications. And even the layout of the story map in the episode battle mode isn't well explained, leaving you to figure out the flow of it on your own. Moving through its many battles and cutscenes is cumbersome, even with the option to skip to different arcs. There's a clunkiness to these menus that becomes more noticeable as the glitz and glamour fade after the initial impressive debut. At the end of the day, I'm playing this game to fight, and constantly being pulled out of them to navigate annoying menus did dilute the experience a little. Still, the overall polish was admirable. I wish the music had been a little bit more heart-pounding. I think the original Tenkaichi games clear this one easily in that regard, but at the end of the day, the team did a remarkable job presenting these characters and this world in all their memorable glory. Alright, as we move into this next section, let me first establish that I'm not a big fighting game fan. I'm just a Dragon Ball fan. The lighter and more stylized arena fighters like this appeal to me more, and I do have some familiarity with them from Tenkaichi 2 and 3, but I'm by no means an expert. I'm just going to give you my overall opinions on combat without getting too nitty-gritty with the discussion. I'll never be someone who plays these games to become one of the best out there, but instead, I view it as a fun way to interact with some awesome characters in flashy, choreographed fights. That's the perspective I'm coming from, as always, a more casual fan speaking to those of a similar ilk. So here we go. Sparking Zero has a solid foundation to its combat system, a healthy dose of mechanics new and old that are applied evenly to a monumental roster of characters, meaning that no matter who you play as, the basics will always apply even if your speed, size, power, health, and abilities all change. You have your basic melee attack, a grab, and combos, some of which can stun your opponents or can be charged to send them flying across the map, taking advantage of the large open spaces. You also have a ranged attack with your Chi Blast, which do a bit of chip damage while disrupting your opponent from charging. Defensively, you have a few options including a sidestep, a vanish technique to get behind your opponent, and counter moves that can stop an enemy in their tracks if you time it right. There's of course more advanced techniques as well, but I'll save that for those more suited to talk about them in other reviews. And then, movement-wise, you can perform a small dash or fast dash across the map at the cost of Chi. And by charging your Chi all the way up, you unlock a sparking mode for a short time, which provides a huge buff to your character, giving you the upper hand while granting access to the character's super move. On top of that, each character has unique abilities and moves that they can do during battle. As you play, a meter charges in the upper left corner of the screen, and as it fills, you receive 1 point. To activate your abilities, you'll have to spend these recurring points. And these abilities include things like temporarily paralyzing the opponent, or instant transmission, which gets you directly behind them from any point on the map, or an explosive wave that knocks an enemy back, or a quick activation of sparking mode, and other general buffs. all useful strategies that can turn the tide of battle or get you out of a pinch. At the same time, you can also spend your chi bars to activate character-specific moves, like Kamehameha, Death Ball, Supernova, Final Flash, Special Beam Cannon, Dragon Fist, Gallic Gun, and other iconic moves from across the series. And to get access to your most powerful moves, you'll have to enter Sparking Mode by charging your chi bar to the very limit. These moves hit for a ton of damage if you're able to land them, and they are flashy as hell. They went all out with the presentation of them, and that emphasis really makes the fights feel meaty and epic. One improvement this game has over the original trilogy is that all of these character-specific moves take more effort to connect on. Firing one off at an ill-advised time makes it extremely easy for an opponent to dodge, especially the pretty smart AI found at the base difficulty. You have to earn that extra damage by opening up your opponent with a stagger or a knockback while in close combat, and it makes connecting on one of those moves all the more skill intensive and enjoyable. Perhaps this is a credit to the game's AI, but it was something I noticed for sure. I really had to think about when I fired that Kamehameha. So those are the basics, and in my opinion, they're pretty solid. You have these universal ideas that can be applied to every character in the game regardless of that character's properties. But those properties, like size, speed, moveset, and more, allow for different playstyles to emerge. So as long as you have a grip on the basics, you can pick up and play any character, while more experience with said character will lead to greater mastery and proficiency as you learn how to bring out the best in them. And the incredible presentation and style during fights allows for them to never get dull either. It encourages you to try new characters to see what their moves look like. It's these factors that allow Sparking Zero to feel so fun, at least for me as a more casual fan. But even without being a deep dive player who dissects every mechanic and move, it is clear that there are some big issues. I've identified 4 problems with the gameplay: the handling of tutorials, the difficulty, the overpowered vanish, and the ability capsules. I've ordered those from most frustrating to least frustrating, and I'm going to go over them in that order. Tutorials are like the offensive linemen of video games. When they're good, almost no one bats an eye or gives them any credit, but as soon as one falters, everyone's fast to call them out, and for good reason. A game's tutorial is critical in onboarding the player, easing them into the experience, allowing for learning while building intrigue with the story, setting, or presentation. Sparking Zero really struggles with this process. When you boot up the game, you get a quick fight with Vegeta to learn the absolute bare minimum. I'm talking a fight that lasts 4 minutes or less, depending on how quick you pick it up. And then you're just dropped into the main menu screens. So naturally, players will check out the story mode, since that's what's presented first. They'll stumble through a few fights before coming face to face with Great Ape Vegeta, who will proceed to clean their clock if they haven't taken the time to prepare. The tutorial has done nothing to teach the player on how to deal with larger enemies like this, or how to maneuver around enemies using Vanish, which I'd argue is the most important move in the game. If not, then certainly top 3. So you end up getting wrecked by the monkey in the first 20 minutes of the experience, and it leaves you wondering why the game feels so brutally difficult, especially this early on. Without a proper tutorial, the player hasn't been onboarded to the experience in the best way possible, and it can leave them with a really bad first impression of the game. That's what happened to me. A real sense that this game had no shot of living up to the memories in my head, and that I had wasted $70. Luckily, I read some forums online and saw a lot of encouragement to check out the game's training mode, and taking that advice is what salvaged this experience. In a world where so many games are coming out all the time, having a bad first impression can see a player bounce off your title in favor of something else without even giving it a second thought. Sparking Zero really drops the ball in this regard. you are on your own to figure out that you need to stumble into the training menu to get the real tutorial, and that is a huge misstep for the game. Of course, that only applies to the opening hours. I spent an hour in the training room until I had a good grip on the basics before returning to story mode. I overwhelmed Grade 8 Vegeta on my first try with my new knowledge and skills, which felt amazing. I never returned to the training mode after this, but as I continued playing through the story, it's clear that I probably should have. Later fights really crank up the difficulty, which we'll get to in a minute, but it also presented new Clash minigames that I had no context for. Often when beam moves connect, or both of you fly at each other at super speed, or even just when a fight begins, the player is sucked into these clashes where a QTE must be performed. By outperforming your opponent, you win the encounter, whether that means your beam overpowers theirs, or you send them flying after a round of intense fist fighting. However, these QTEs just come out of nowhere. There's no tutorial, there's no warning, they just happen, and if you aren't quick to react, you just lose. It's not like enter a button prompt and you just automatically win, like in God of War. No, there's steps to this. There's things that you must do in a correct order to actually win the fights. Okay, some of them are a button mash, but I never got a full grasp on what many of these QTEs wanted from me, and as a result, I found myself losing them often. It was really annoying when trying to complete Goku Black's story in particular, when you're fighting against Vegito and he just pummels you over and over after losing the opening QTE. Just another example of failing to teach the player properly. You could argue it's the game trusting the player to figure it out on their own, but I don't really subscribe to that notion. Even a game so unwilling to hold the player's hand, like Dark Souls, still found it important to teach the player all the basics first. And Sparking Zero doesn't feel the same sense of urgency, and it creates a bad first impression, and it lingers throughout the experience. After training though, you can push through those initial low vibes. Of course, as you continue to play through story mode, you will notice another major problem: difficulty spikes. There really doesn't seem to be any major pattern to these, no sense that the game is ramping up the challenge in a predictable and navigable way. Instead, tough fights are just thrown in at random, sometimes not even being the final fight of an iconic saga. For example, there's an alternate scenario where you must defeat the entire Ginyu force in quick succession without healing up, and it's asking a lot of the player. But then, following that tough encounter, you get a series of one-on-one fights against Frieza, and they feel like a cakewalk in comparison. Or how the fight against Fuse Zamasu feels easier than the earlier bouts against him and Goku Black. And perhaps worst of all is that the game's most notable feature, the what-if scenarios that tell alternate stories within the campaign, are completely locked off if you drop the difficulty, which is super annoying. When normal mode can feel so punishing, it's a shame that one of the coolest ideas is gate-kept behind it. And more on those what-if scenarios in a few moments. But at the same time, some fights feel incredibly stacked against the player, especially in Jiren's storyline when you're asked to defeat Android 17, Golden Frieza, and Vegeta Super in a row with no breaks, and your only heal being an expensive meditate ability that only restores 20% of your health. This is part of a non-canon storyline, but still, it's in the game, and it's brutal. And of course, there's the aforementioned fight with Grade 8 Vegeta. Truly, the difficulty and poor tutorial problems go hand in hand, and I do believe if the game put more effort into teaching the player everything, then a lot of the difficulty could be mitigated. Or perhaps I just needed more time in the training room. Challenge in games is subjective, but that's my overall take on the difficulty. Next problem is the vanish technique, which seems unbalanced. The player can teleport behind the opponent to escape a melee attack. This costs 1 chi bar to do, but can be repeated ad nauseum until you run out of chi because of a very generous timing window. Your opponent has access to this power as well, meaning you get these instances in which characters are just constantly teleporting behind each other until one runs out of chi, and it looks goofy while feeling a bit unfair owed to the low skill floor to do it. In other words, whoever has the most chi is going to prevail in these moments, especially against the AI who isn't afraid to spam the technique just as much as you. And it's funny because when I tried playing online, I sometimes found myself over-vanishing, anticipating my opponent to do the same because of the story mode, and then I got hit as a result. I would have liked to see the timing window be reduced after each successful vanish, or for it to tax you 2 chi bars instead of 1 after your first vanish. As it is now, it just feels a bit overpowered, especially in the AI's hands. And finally, we have the ability capsules, which can be bought in the shop and equipped in the customization menu. These are general items that can be equipped to characters to give them buffs, like more health, or sparking mode lasting longer, or some harder hitting moves. First of all, without proper tutorials and absent of time in the training room, it can be difficult to understand exactly what a capsule is going to do. If a player has not been taught exactly what a Z-burst dash or guard clash is, then many of these descriptions will lack the context needed for understanding to take place. Of course, even after that, it's unclear what game modes ability capsules actually work in. I kept exiting story mode to go equip capsules, only to return and not see any sort of change. Perhaps it gave me a psychological boost because I found myself winning more after doing this, but I could never be 100% sure if they were affecting gameplay or not. Even now, as I sit here and write this script, attempting to do more research, all I can find online is a lot of confused players who feel the same way, unsure of how the capsules work. There's no concrete, clear explanation that I can find, but it seems they only affect online play and not the story mode. This means I wasted a lot of time exiting the story mode and navigating the clunky menus just to receive no real benefit. And then to make matters even worse, every single character and every iteration of a character must be assigned their capsules individually, which is a very time-consuming process on top of all the other problems. I genuinely felt like I was better off trying to get better at the game itself than fiddling with these ability capsules at all. Some more clarity on their functionality would have went a long way. And to be truthful, I wouldn't be surprised if any of these problems come off as confusing to more experienced players who have taken far more time than I to learn the intricacies of Sparking Zero. I think there's a theme that ties many of my perceived problems together though, an inability or unwillingness to teach the player important mechanics and systems. Perhaps more time in training mode could have solved some of these problems, but for me, if I am wrong, it's just evidence of the game's poor process of onboarding the player with well thought out tutorials. Sparking Zero is a really fun game, but you'll get out of it what you put into it, and don't expect any help along the way. Okay, so with combat established, let's take a look at the framework in which you get to experience it. Sparking Zero has 5 distinct modes, and I think each of them bring a lot to the package, elevating it into something special when viewed as a whole. Those 5 game modes are Episode Battle, Custom Battle, Training, Tournaments, and Online. So let's go through each and check them out. Sparking Zero is by no means the first Dragon Ball game, and seeing how the story has already been recounted various times throughout gaming history, the team elected to take a simpler approach here. Story mode contains 7 of Dragon Ball's most famous sagas: Saiyan, Frieza, Cell, Majin Buu, God of Destruction, Goku Black and Zamasu, and the Tournament of Power. You won't really play through any of the minor battles from these sagas, as instead, fights are reserved for the most iconic battles. There's a huge connected story map spanning these many fights, and you'll experience combat from 8 different perspectives: Goku, Vegeta, Gohan, Piccolo, Future Trunks, Frieza, Goku Black, and Jiren represent those perspectives as you play through fights using these characters, whether they're against one another or one of the other many Dragon Ball characters like Kid Buu, Dodoria, Zarbon, or Toppo. Personally, I wouldn't have minded if they included every fight from the series, similar to Tenkaichi 2, but I can see how that would have been tiresome to fans who've played every game and stuck with the franchise far more than I. But, I'm happy to have experienced some new Dragon Ball stories that I wasn't familiar with, especially the Tournament of Power. That was sick, although Beerus' section seemed incredibly light on content. Overall, it's a decent track to the most iconic Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball Super fights. What's most interesting here, though, is the inclusion of what-if scenarios that can be played out by completing alternate objectives in various fights. For example, defeating an opponent quickly when you're supposed to simply hold out against them, or choosing a different dialogue option that contradicts what happened in the show. These open up some different routes that contain lengthy branches with many new fights and story beats. It includes things like, what if Golden Frieza had defeated Vegito? Or what if Raditz was defeated without Goku dying alongside of him? Or what if Gohan and Goku were swapped out for Vegeta and Trunks during the Cell Saga? Truth be told, I didn't find many of these alternate stories to be extremely interesting. In fact, some of them are damn near close to what already happens, but they were a fun twist that changed up expectations and offered some fan service, non-canon moments. A smart inclusion to give fans something new. Of course, they aren't without their faults, as is story mode as a whole. As aforementioned, the what-if scenarios can only be unlocked on normal difficulty, which can be really hard on its own. And that's just silly, since those branching pathways are the mode's biggest point of differentiation from previous Dragon Ball games. Locking them off just seems stupid. At the same time, some of the branching paths themselves are downright dastardly to complete, especially Jiren's, which contains the hardest fight in the game in my opinion. But for me, the worst part of the entire story mode was easily Goku Black and Zamazu's sections, regardless of which character you were playing as. This saga features 4 of the 8 playable characters, meaning you'll be going through the same story bits and fights a lot, especially considering every fight involves only Goku, Vegeta, Trunks, Goku Black, and Zamazu, without anyone else joining the fray. It feels like every fight is an exact copy of the last one with just a few details changed up, and it gets extremely stale, drudging through it when trying to complete every character's campaign. I played them in order too, so by the time I got to Goku Black's storyline, I was already sick of the whole thing. And without a doubt, his story mode is the hardest to complete, with seemingly every battle having some weird little what-if scenario branching off of it. It felt like I kept hitting the alternative route instead of the main path, unsure of how to advance things normally. And it just felt incredibly tedious, repetitive, and boring after going through this saga with 3 previous characters. Like I said, I haven't watched the show at all, so I'm not sure if it felt bloated there, but in Sparking Zero, it feels beyond bloated. It's damn near stuffed, while Beerus' story section, again, feels woefully underdeveloped. Maybe that's based on the source material, but it really came off as uneven. Even still, story mode is a good time and provides a great opportunity to visit these characters once more. It greatly assumes you're familiar with the series and that you don't need to be told the tales over again, and if that's you, it may just be your new favorite Dragon Ball story mode in games. And the what if scenarios are the cherry on top. Okay, next up we have custom mode, which if you thought the what if moments were cool, this takes things from Kaioken times 10 to times 20. Imagine if you took the unlimited creative freedom of Super Mario Maker and dropped it into Sparking Zero, and you'll have a pretty good idea of what custom mode allows. Essentially, this is a way to create miniaturized episodes of Dragon Ball without many restrictions at all. And no, I don't just mean making Sin Shenron fight Cell. I'm talking about making full gameplay scenarios with accompanying cutscenes that tell a story all your own, and then granting you the freedom to upload that story for others to play through. It's really some astounding stuff here. It starts with the bonus battles, which simply show off what the mode is capable of, granting you 30 plus handcrafted developer scenes to play through. These are fun fights in their own right, but they're meant to get the creative juices flowing within the player, delivering a spark of imagination that can be carried into their own creations. From here, you can jump into making your own choreographed fights and cutscenes. After a lengthy tutorial, the best the game does on that front I'd wager, you're set free to make whatever the hell you want. The number of options at your fingertips is beyond what I had imagined during the pre-release marketing cycle. You can choose the fighters and the arena obviously, but so much more, including battle conditions that trigger new events, whether they are transformations, fusions, cutscenes, and more. And then you're free to make those cutscenes into whatever you want, using playable or non-playable characters, choosing from a vast pool of stances and scenes for characters to take, including facial animations, poses, knockback effects, status conditions, and more. And then there's a tremendous amount of pre-written dialogue options with interchangeable words that can be mixed and matched to tell a story wholly unique to your imagination. And then, of course, there's a bunch more options to bring your cutscenes to life and order them however you choose. I'm not really the most creative guy out there, but what excited me as I tried making my own scenario was the realization that I could play other people's creations instead. And that's what I did. There's going to be people out there who will spend hours and hours building the perfect 5-minute fight, creating a small-scale episode of the show, telling a unique story, whether it's based on comedy, romance, or just an intense encounter. While you won't get the voice acting to back it up, it's very easy to read the lines how the characters would, providing hours of enjoyment in the process. Like, I played through this one scenario where Gohan was proposing to Videl, or maybe it was Bulma, I don't remember, but then Vegeta swoops in and puts the moves on her instead. After a clash amongst these quarreling men, a corrupted version of Super Saiyan 3 Goku shows up for a quick fight before everyone gets the hell out of there. And brilliantly, you can go to a player's archive of uploaded battles, meaning that you can tell entire stories. So what I did in that case was, I jumped into the next episode, which cracked me up. The creator used the dialogue options and injected a bit of innuendo to make it hysterical, only for Gohan to re-emerge, except he's taken the form of Metal Cooler and plans to get his revenge on you. The whole scenario made me laugh while providing a tough challenge. It was fun, it was interesting, it was new, it made me laugh, and it was all created by some random guy out there, which feels amazing. By far, Sparking Zero's high chances of sustaining a community and living a long life will be because of this mode and the infinite possibilities that players can and will create. A total home run, and in my opinion, the best offering in Sparking Zero, regardless of how creative you are. Then we have the training mode. As established, the opening tutorial does very little to teach you the depth of the combat system. Training helps eliminate that, and you better get ready to dedicate yourself to it like Goku and Vegeta if you want to get better at the game. For me, I just wanted to get good enough to complete story mode, so I spent about an hour with it to learn the less advanced techniques. However, for those wanting to learn the intricacies and small details to push your skills to the limit, more time in this mode will help accomplish that goal. However, it's going to take trial and error as the game just throws up the button prompts and tells you to go to work. If you can't remember the name of another move that must be performed before attempting the move you're training for, well, you're just cooked. Back to the menus to study. And sometimes the moves require timing that just isn't conveyed by just showing the buttons, so yeah, training mode is not perfect, but it taught me enough to be competitive and to beat the story mode, so it was fine. And then of course there's the various tournaments for the player to compete in, like the Cell Games, World Tournament, and Tournament of Power, amongst others. Each of these various modes provide bracketed matches for the player to complete while toggling between the different options. For example, in the World Tournament, if you get knocked out of the ring, you automatically lose. In the Cell games, you don't get back all your health after each fight. And the Yamcha games randomize every character, including the one you play as. Oh, and then there's the Tournament of Power, which lets you choose a roster of 5 characters, instead of just one, and swap between them freely as you fight. These are a fun and great way to practice with the game's huge roster. One of my favorite parts of Sparking Zero was just doing these offline tournaments to see how crazy some of the iconic ultimate moves looked, while playing with some of the characters not featured in story mode. I loved it, and of course you can also customize your own tournaments with various rule sets as well. An expected but great game mode, no doubt. And finally, there's online play, which again is not my cup of tea, but I did dabble with it to test it out. You can play online in nearly any format, but the most popular seems to be this mode, where you get a certain number of points and can choose characters to play as until you use all your points up. Better characters cost more points. Of course, this mostly applies to the ranked mode, which I found much easier to find matches in versus the more relaxed quick match modes. To be honest, if you don't have a lot of time on your hands, you'll almost be railroaded into playing ranked because of how long it takes sitting in these lobbies while playing unranked. It's kind of antithetical. It's like the quick match isn't even quick, it's just weird. All in all though, I didn't have any connection or server issues while playing online, and it was fun to see how well I could build a team. I've sort of settled on Videl, Berter, Gogeta, and Jace as my current rotation. Look, the Blue Hurricane is easily one of my top 3 Dragon Ball characters, and I just had to give him a shot online. I just love the speed at which he moves, alongside of his quips and his love of chocolate parfaits. Overall, when it comes to content, Sparking Zero is not lacking at all. There's a deluge of things to do after finishing the meaty story mode, whether it's making your own custom battles, playing those designed by others, messing around in tournaments, or challenging your skills online. As this video winds down, I briefly wanted to go over the other menus in Sparking Zero and just touch base on them. There's the Shop and Customization menu, which allows you to buy and equip different fighters, outfits, ability capsules, songs, fighting styles, and more. You'll use the in-game currency called Zenny to purchase them, and it's nice to see that you earn plenty of this simply by playing the game, especially the story mode, and as far as I can tell, you can't buy it for real-world money. You can also unlock different items by completing story mode and bonus battles, but if you don't want to wait, they can be purchased in the shop as well, which is nice. It gives you multiple ways to unlock everything. For me, I just wanted to get all the characters, and the game was more than willing to hand out a ton of Zenny to do so. My only complaint here, outside of the clunky menus, would be the lack of outfits for the villains. I understand that they didn't get many wardrobe changes during the show's runtime, hell, some of them don't even wear clothes, but I think there was a missed opportunity for the developers to get weird and creative, but oh well. You can also customize your player card that others will see online, as well as summoning the different dragons after gathering all the Dragon Balls. Shenron and others will grant your wishes, whether it be more money, unlocking new characters, and more. I love the inclusion of this. It's just a fun way of rewarding the player while tying it back into the franchise's established lore. And of course, the Encyclopedia mode returns with additional commentary from Bulma and Videl alongside Chi-Chi, which is awesome. It's clear the passion the development team had for the original Tenkaichi games and packed in as many references and cool extras as possible, knowing that fans would love it. What's evident to me as I reflect on this script is that this game really feels like a series of peaks and valleys. In some ways, it's what I always wanted from a modern-day take on a childhood classic. A huge roster of faithfully adapted Dragon Ball characters, a lengthy story campaign, and attention to detail towards character portrayal, and a bunch of fun modes to mess around in. Sparking Zero has all of those things, but kicks it up a few notches with the inclusion of the remarkable custom battle mode and what-if scenarios, alongside a plentiful number of rewards that aren't too hard to unlock. But the game is not without its flaws, and I wanted to be upfront with those as I made this review. Those clunky menus, the weird handling of ability capsules, the difficulty spikes, and of course the game's unwillingness to teach the player organically all come to mind. But I think it's a testament to this game's quality that, despite those problems, I still don't hesitate for a second to recommend this title to any fan of the Dragon Ball series, and am still considering it as a frontrunner for my personal game of the year. We often hear the term a love letter to the franchise when talking about games that do the source material justice while providing an incredibly joyous experience. And that's an easy label to slap on this game. For me though, Sparking Zero goes beyond that, as if some Super Saiyan version of that sentiment. It roots around in your brain, it isolates your nostalgia, and then hits it with a dragon fist. It does this by consistently honoring the late great Akira Toriyama's legacy and vision, showing off his characters and stories in wonderful ways, new and old, while also inviting the player to create stories of their own. It's this willingness to bring established fans into the writing room, so to speak, that truly elevates Sparking Zero. It delivers what we know and love about Dragon Ball, the epic fights, the lovable characters, the iconic locations, and more, while also giving the player the tools to create the non-canon fights and encounters they've always envisioned from a young age, and I think there's something truly special about that. Whether you want to experience the story again, create your own narratives, challenge your skills online, or just mess around with the awesome combos and moves, Sparking Zero provides that experience and more. You just have to be willing to join Goku, Vegeta, and Gohan in their training process, discovering your inner potential, strength, and creativity, and pushing yourself to get better on the sticks. Thanks for watching. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this look at Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. It's one of those games that the fun factor just completely dominated the experience for me. It's like, yeah, I could see the problems, but I ultimately didn't end up caring at all. There's ways for it to be improved in a sequel, which does excite me, but how even DLC and patches could deliver that. So I wholeheartedly recommend this game to anyone who enjoys Dragon Ball. It's definitely one of my personal favorites on the year so far, and I'd love to hear what you think about it in the comments below. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing for more, follow me on Twitter at NopNapNarp, and as always, have a nice day and take care.